Hello, my fellow seekers. Welcome to Into the Work, therapy for empaths, seekers, and the intuitively driven, where you have front row seats to therapy sessions and expert interviews that will help you define the important work that you're here to do. So I guess you actually have something better than front row seats. You practically have a seat on my couch. That's right, you will have unrestricted access to actual sessions with real people, exploring real life issues. You will continue to be inspired by powerful conversations with experts and healers that might just share exactly what it is that you need to hear to get unstuck. I am Michelle Poverman. I am a recovering people pleaser and former anxiety-driven empath, turned now mostly grounded psychotherapist and intuitive coach. I have been helping people for almost 20 years manage their limiting beliefs and anxiety to finally stop the self-sabotage and step into their gifts. I created this podcast, Into the Work, to give you a place to learn more about yourself and give you actionable strategies to finally move those roadblocks holding you back so you can go for what you want. Above all else, my hope is that this podcast is a catalyst for your awakening. If you're listening, you've already taken a step towards getting off of autopilot, and our next steps together will be taken episode by episode, waking you up to the possibilities, the new ways of thinking and being, so that you can stretch into that next level of your story. The spark has already been lit, and my friend, this is a journey from spark to brilliance. So together, let's light a fire. Hello, I am Michelle Poverman, and welcome back to Into the Work. I am here today to talk to you about your high threshold for anxiety. Is it making you more resilient, or could it be blocking your intuition? Could it be helping you be more indecisive, set unhealthy goals, accept unhealthy relationships? So let's dive in and talk about this because it's a little tricky, and I think we're going to find it really interesting when you apply this to yourself. So let's start by defining what the heck I mean by high threshold for anxiety. So on some level, it can seem like it refers to a positive trait, right? So the ability to handle stress and anxiety-provoking situations without becoming too overwhelmed or experiencing too much significant emotional distress so that you can't function. That sounds good, right? So we're going to unpack this a bit today so that you can have a greater awareness around your own ways of coping with anxiety that may actually be contributing to other issues that you're experiencing that you would otherwise never put the two together. So while a high threshold for anxiety, of course, it can be a strength, it's important for you to recognize when it might be leading to you neglecting yourself, neglecting your self-care, downplaying your stress, increasing a lack of self-awareness, adding to indecision and a disconnection to yourself and your intuition. So that's what we're going to kind of look at is both sides of the coin here and how you can find a middle ground. So most people don't recognize that it can lead to feeling lost. This high threshold for anxiety, which seems like a resiliency trait, can also lead to you getting lost, feeling off track, even finding that you're kind of settling into this untapped potential. So it's not that you might be out there crushing goals, perhaps, but they may not be your sole purpose goals, if that makes sense. So let's talk about how this can sometimes be a trap. Now, characteristics of a high threshold for anxiety. First off, we look at resiliency in stressful situations, right? So you maybe have an ability to stay calm and composed, even in high pressure environments. I'm kind of fall into this category here. And in so much of my life, people have always said to me, wow, Michelle, you're so calm. And when I tell them that I have dealt with anxiety my whole life, they're like, you? No way. Because I really pull this off, right? I really pull this off. So I appear very calm and composed, and I am very good in high pressure situations. If there's an emergency, I'm there. I'm your girl, right? So I can show up and manage my anxiety in that way. And so when we see that over time, people who have a high threshold for anxiety, they really get to show up in difficult situations. Maybe your job is high performance. Maybe whatever's going on and how you're managing everything in your life really appears stellar. And delayed emotional response is another part of this that I want to make sure we point out. And that is a tendency to process and respond to your anxiety-provoking situations later rather than immediately. This was me, right? So I tend to process my emotions after the fact. Sometimes I don't even feel that stuff until days later. So sometimes you'll see people who have a high threshold for their anxiety. You'll notice that if this is you, that you have a delayed emotional response. So when you're in the midst of it, you don't feel it until later and it kind of just slams you and hits you. And you have a tendency to maybe even push that away when it happens, maintaining some productivity and functionality even when facing significant stress, right? All those are positive aspects, including greater resiliency in daily life, work, relationships, ability to tackle challenges without crushing over feeling overwhelmed. Somehow you make it happen, you get it all done, even though doesn't mean it's not overwhelming. So potential drawbacks to this is the risk of pushing through stress without addressing the underlying anxiety. You're so used to feeling the anxiety and pushing it down and managing at this upper level that you actually risk pushing through this without having any self-awareness around the level of stress that your body, your physical body especially, but your energetic body, your emotional body, is under. And so possible neglect of self-care due to a belief that you can handle anything, right? Or that you can push through it. Some examples in professional life could be handling a heavy workload, doing well with tight deadlines, demanding projects without crushing from the anxiety and overwhelm. You thrive in high-pressure environments, maybe. You often take on more responsibilities without feeling overwhelmed. Again, it's not that you don't experience anxiety. There's almost a numbing that happens, and we're going to get into that because you're just so used to having anxiety that you actually are so used to pushing it down, I should say. So personal relationships, you might do really well managing conflicts, and in terms of emotionally charged situations, you might be the person that is the calm demeanor. You probably play the role of mediator a lot, right? You might even play the role of peacekeeper. You tend to bring other people's charge down because you're so used to constantly being in control of your stuff, not letting it spin out of control, that you actually can do that for other people. You might notice as a sign that you are the person that friends and family rely on to stay composed during difficult times. So if you look in your family when something traumatic or difficult has happened, did they come to you, right? Were you somebody who kind of grounded people? So let's look at how someone might develop a high threshold for anxiety and just see if you can find yourself or if you can relate to some of this. So life experiences, I'm going to put them in two categories. There probably are many more, but to keep it simple for today, I'm just going to point out that someone who has grown up with repeated exposure to stress, meaning growing up in a high stress environment, such as one with frequent conflict, high demand, unpredictable situations, can condition a person to tolerate and manage anxiety better. For some of us, right? Not all of us. Now, even as an empath, you can go either way, right? As an empath, sometimes we ask that question, is empath really its own unique thing, or is it just a trauma response? And to that, I say, put two people in the same situation where there's trauma, and you'll see different outcomes for different people. I think the empath is born sensitive, and still, even as an empath, you learn to adapt. You learn how to manage the overwhelming emotion that you do feel, especially as a kid. So let's say you're growing up in a high stress environment. Perhaps there's a lot of conflict between your parents or high demands or unpredictable situations. This can condition you to kind of tolerate and manage things better, as I was saying. Perhaps in the beginning, it led to overwhelm of your nervous system, especially as an empath. It was a lot to take in. But you skillfully learn to desensitize yourself to triggers. For example, if you grew up in a home where a parent had an issue with anger, you may have learned to adapt in those unpredictable outbursts. Even if you flooded with your own anxiety, you learned that you can move on. And in order to cope, you probably adapted in different ways, but you did learn, oh, I can do this. I can get through this. You may have adapted by becoming the funny one, the clown, the caretaker, the person who fixes the situation immediately and gets everybody calmed back down. You learned you can adapt and be okay. But here's where it gets tricky. Does this desensitization to this person's angry outbursts at home, and then therefore your desensitization of your anxiety, you push it back down, right? You're getting less and less sensitive around it. And so the question is, does this keep you accepting volatile individuals into your life because one, you've normalized it, and two, you can tolerate it? It doesn't overwhelm you maybe, perhaps, because you know how to manage it and you have a well-established role in how you do that. You have a well-established role in being the fixer, the funny one, whoever, the caretaker, whatever it is that you do. And so you might ignore the signals that aren't okay, that somebody's not okay for you, how they're treating you is not okay, what's happening doesn't feel okay. But if you're so accustomed to pushing down the anxiety and having this high threshold, then you are accepting behavior from somebody else that might otherwise be unacceptable to you had you not have this experience of coping. Now, opposite to that is this idea of just modeling behavior. You might have just had caregivers or significant adults in your life when you were growing up that demonstrated a very strong ability to handle stress without showing anxiety. A child can learn to adopt similar behaviors and coping mechanisms. So as an empath, this might have led you to feel confused about how much emotions you were experiencing. This could have led you to feel broken inside, or perhaps even shame over the anxiety that you were experiencing when you have the very clear modeling that this anxiety doesn't match. It shouldn't. This high level of stress, these big jobs your parents had, this stressful life, there was never any anxiety shown. And so your anxiety shouldn't be happening either. So you had that experience of, I shouldn't have this, I can't have this, I shouldn't have this. And so you might have adapted by learning to numb it, push it down, avoid and push through, just like your parents. Now, there are coping mechanisms that we have in this that I don't mean to make it sound like it's all bad. There's definitely resiliency factors that many of us have. And these are ones that we can work on right now to sort of help you, again, find that middle ground where you can have a higher threshold, but also, and we'll get into that towards the end, about work that you can do to make sure that you're staying balanced and healthy in it. And these negative side effects, are in check. So when we look at coping mechanisms, some of you have really, especially those of you that have been doing work as empaths, you might have really learned to look for the lessons. And I love that. You'll hear me say that all the time, like just look for the lessons. That helps ground you. When you look for the lessons, it is a resiliency factor that you are capable of seeing the bigger picture and finding the deeper meaning. Learning to reframe stressful situations positively or challenges rather than threats helps you build resiliency against anxiety. So if that's part of your spiel, that you are creating a mindset that says, this is a challenge, not a threat. I'm going to find the lessons. This is always teaching me. I'm always learning. Those are really wonderful coping mechanisms for having a high threshold for anxiety. Now, I mentioned suppression and numbing because that's something that people with this sort of high threshold usually do by suppressing and numbing their emotional responses, consciously or unconsciously, choosing not to acknowledge the anxiety, like, nope, I'm not having this. Nope, make it go away. I'm not having it. In a recent podcast, I mentioned that I love saying this mantra where I just say, I don't do overwhelm. Now, that in itself is beautiful. I love it. It charges me up. It grounds me. It lets me know that no, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. And at the same time, I'm also emotionally connecting enough with myself that I understand how I'm feeling, how that is manifesting in my emotions, my body, my brain. I'm in check with it. So suppressing and numbing can actually be more problematic because you're really choosing not to acknowledge it. And so you're stuffing it. And so that is where we look at these blocks, even energetically. Most energetic blocks are emotional. So when you're looking at these blocks in our body, it's all that stuffing that you're doing is eventually going to come back to bite you, right? So problem-solving skills, I will just say some of us, empath or not, our problem-solving skills can really lead to our ability to believe in ourselves. So if you have demonstrated to yourself through your life that you have strong problem-solving skills, that it's figure-outable, that you can figure it out, that you have an ability to manage any situation, that reduces the impact of your anxiety. So that's another positive one where you can look at managing your anxiety through a positive belief in yourself. But let's talk about how this high level of threshold can be seen as a strength. Like I said, throughout my life, everybody thought I was just so zen all the time. And part of that was lack of boundaries, and we'll get into that, but all sorts of things going on, people pleasing and things like that can really mask our anxiety. And we can really learn how to dance in a zone of anxiety by pushing it away and showing up and acting as if, right, that it's all fine. It's important for us to understand how this can be interfering with your intuition, your ability to make soul-led choices and decisions and create goals for yourself and your life, choosing the direction in which your life goes. All of that gets kind of blocked in terms of that intuitive process. So let's dive into that so you can kind of see how this shows up for you. If you have this high threshold for anxiety, it might lead you to ignore or suppress your emotional responses. Like I said, sometimes you might be like, I processed that like a week later or 2 months later, right? So since intuition often communicates through subtle energy signals, this suppression can make it really harder to not only recognize your intuitive hits, but also trust those nudges that come up, used to pushing through stress without acknowledging how it affects you. You might overlook feelings of discomfort, like real strong pangs of discomfort. They're telling you and trying to guide you away from something, or the excitement and the high level of thrill that comes up that is really trying to push you towards something. But if you are in this level of pushing everything down, you might not be accessing the emotional signaling that your intuition depends on, utilizes. And then another thing that kind of plays into it is sort of this overemphasis of logic and control. And I know some of you are raising your hand right now because even saying those words, you're like, yep, that's me. People with a high threshold for anxiety may rely heavily on logic and reason to navigate their life. They value the feeling of control, obviously, right? That's how they push through, they get through, they love the predictability of it. This can truly overshadow those intuitive insights, which are often less about logic and more about feeling or deep inner knowing. We talked about that when I did the recent episode on intuition, that you have the ability to sort of practice turning down the volume on your more logical thoughts and turning up the volume on receiving information, and really the value you have of finding and how to utilize both. But when you are somebody who truly does, maybe categorically you see yourself as an overthinker, quote unquote, you might prioritize what seems most practical and safe. So when you're making decisions, you might really prioritize what seems safe rather than what feels aligned with your deeper desires or your soul purpose. And we know that intuition and soul purpose is not about safety, right? Like our egos want us to be safe, but our soul wants us to be on an adventure where we fly until we fall down. All of it being part of the learning process, right? But that overemphasis on logic and control can really get in the way of kind of being in that soulful energy of the unknown, right? The land of possibilities that can feel very uncomfortable. And I also just want to highlight again this aspect of delaying emotional processing, because it can be very common for us because we don't process things necessarily in the moment they're happening. So anxiety is managed by delaying it for later. And there's a risk that intuitive insights, which often require some openness, time for reflection, emotional clarity, gets kind of lost in the shuffle. So you might push through a busy period of time without taking the time to check in with yourself. And you might miss out on insights that could steer you towards more soul-aligned goals. So you have a busy period. And if you delay the processing and you don't actually get the information and learn the lesson that you need, you might be making decisions left and right that are steering you in a direction that is about somebody else's goals for you, what somebody else wants for you, what you think you should be doing, what looks like success. And so the environment can dictate where you move forward, how you move forward. And that is where we fall out of our purpose. And then we kind of get into that state of unfulfilled potential. And I often say, and I probably said it in this podcast before, a lot of times when I sit with people who are struggling with chronic illness, I always kind of go there, especially if it feels like they won't be offended, right? So sometimes we need to be careful how we approach this with people. But when somebody has a chronic illness, I always want to weigh in with them. I just want to see how it lands. I want to weigh in with them. When I tell you that you might have untapped potential as an underlying issue for this sort of collapse of your physical self, that you're off the path, you have this underlying potential that you are disconnected from. Most people will say that is absolutely true. I've never considered that it was part of my chronic illness, but it is absolutely true for me. So this is why I'm pointing out with you how important it is that if you're a high achiever, if you have a tendency towards a high threshold for anxiety, and ignoring signs of misalignment is kind of big. It's really important to your physical health, your mental health, your well-being. A high threshold can lead to a tendency to push through discomfort without even questioning it. This can result in pursuing goals that are just like we talked about, just not even in alignment with you. You're ending up in some other destination you never really planned on. And it can really be problematic for us. And especially as empaths, because we are kind of mission-driven deep down inside. Most of the time we're here to help, inspire, heal. We're here to, feel like we make a difference. And sometimes that's done in a more extroverted way, and sometimes that's done in a very introverted way. But either way, there is this level of purpose And they can feel big for us empaths. And so to get really off track can make us kind of unwell. So it can really end up compromising our soul-led goals if you're kind of in this place where you're not making room and space for your self-awareness, for the emotional content that's in your body, and paying attention. And as I mentioned, there can be a preference for stability and safety over taking risks, even when those risks are necessary for pursuing soul-led goals. This might lead to compromising or settling for things, again, you truly aren't fulfilling. And I'm hitting this with a hammer here, but I just want to point out for you to question with yourself, have I avoided pursuing a passion project or stepping into my power on something or stepping into my soul purpose on something because it felt uncertain? Even though it resonated deeply with my soul purpose, it was uncertain, and so I kind of needed to push it down and away and stay in the safe zone. So difficulty in surrendering control can also be part of this. And intuition often requires surrendering to the unknown and trusting the process, which can be super challenging for someone with a high threshold for anxiety who prefers control and predictability and to push through and, find success in any way possible without burning out or feeling, too crazy. And speaking of burnout, that's the other piece. I find people who have a real high threshold for anxiety, they are my burnout peeps, right? Like they go until they burn out because they don't know. They're in the lane. They're in the fast lane. And they don't realize the destination is burnout until they get too close to it. And so without acknowledging it's leading to burnout clouds your judgment. It dulls our intuition. It makes it harder to connect with your deeper soul-led desires. You lose motivation. You lose the soulful motivation, right? You can still get caught up in fear-based motivation and try to get it to work for you again to get you out of burnout. It never does because it only depletes you more. But when burnout does occur, you might find it difficult to hear your intuition, to feel connected, all the things to make the decisions you need to make. And so it just leads to a lot of indecisiveness, this lack of connection with the self on a deeper level, lack of emotional intuition can make us quite indecisive, and it's so frustrating. Some obvious strategies for managing this is clearly just really getting a little bit more disciplined on your self-care practices, to encourage yourself to regularly self-reflect, to assess stress levels, to really tend to your emotional well-being. Incorporate mindful practices, deep breathing that also gets you in your body. Anything you can do. And as an empath, being in your body, that is like gold. That is like, that's it. Like you got to get in your body. And I did just talk about this, how important it is for you to take that soul energy that's all around you and get your own soul energy back in your body. Just that little exercise of breathing yourself back in helps you stay more connected to your wisdom, to your emotions, which are that's your superpower. As an empath, your emotions are a superpower. Healthy boundaries are also really important. They're everything. Without boundaries, having a high threshold for anxiety can lead to a lot of overcommitting, overextending, all the things that that we go into that lead to resentment, burnout, all sorts of things that just make us unwell. So learning to set boundaries and recognize and feel and sense the signaling when you are getting to a point of too much, that allowing a little of that anxiety to creep up and say, oh, that's good information. I don't need to push you down today. That's really good information. Thank you. I hear you. I see you. I feel you. Let's move on now. And I'll make a decision to honor you versus I have to push you down and not have you. I can't have you. I won't have you. That's not going to be helpful. So then learning to set boundaries based on your emotional signaling really helps you as a practice shape a life around you that you can love, that you can feel really good about. I highly recommend journaling, practice acknowledging and processing emotions in real time rather than delaying them. But doing the journaling, being present with those emotions, some people just need to write with literally pen to paper. You can do it on a computer, but some people really need that energetic, movement of pen to paper. So I hope that I've demonstrated here today how a wonderful resilient trait as having high threshold for anxiety actually also is a double-sided sword, and that it can also be something that might be keeping you stuck from moving more into this beautiful potential that you have for being this intuitive healer here in the world and really tapping into your emotions. And that's so important as an empath, to make soul-led choices and set goals that resonate with your inner self. It's important to balance your high threshold with self-awareness and emotional attunement. I think what has to happen first as you dive into this is right now, give yourself permission to feel and process emotions as they arise. Make a determined goal that you are not going to ignore, push down, push away, devalue the emotions that you experience. And from now on, you're going to look at them as valuable pieces of information with curiosity. You don't have to freak out. Oh my God, I can't have this. That's the type of stuff that's the trap of the low threshold anxiety, right? But for your high threshold self, you want to really start to learn to listen to that and to make space for it. It's so important as a sensitive empath for you to learn how to use emotional intuition. That's how you build a life around you that is intuitively driven and, it just feels really good versus, the environment, which as a people pleaser is so easy for the environment to just push you around and tell you who you should be, what you should do. So by doing so, you can ensure that your coping strategies are about resiliency still, but they don't get in the way of a life that's deeply aligned with your soul's desires. And now, if you're interested in learning more about emotional intuition, I have a couple of exercises. If you head on over to my website, michellepoverman.com, you will see the Inspiration Hub. And the Inspiration Hub is a place where all my freebies go to live on and inspire. And so if you want to sign up, you can check that out. You'll see the emotional intuition exercises that I walk you through, and give them a try and just notice what comes up and start practicing that asking and receiving. It's really cool. All right, so be well, take good care, and I will talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to Into the Work Therapy for Empaths and Seekers. Don't forget to grab your free gift, your Shadow Work Transformation Bundle at michellepoverman.com. I've included everything you need to get started to break through the patterns of self-sabotage and finally start to heal the parts of yourself that are getting in the way of truly reaching your potential. From a powerful meditation designed to help you meet and embrace your shadow self, to the guide that's full of curated prompts and important questions to support you on this journey. This really can be the work for you to unmask the root cause of all the issues you've been experiencing, honestly, and start to feel free to believe in yourself and go for what you want. The link for this free bundle is in the show notes. And if you like this episode, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment and rate, click and follow, and leave a review. Of course, you can always follow me on socials at Michelle Poverman. And keep in mind, as you embark on your journey from spark to brilliance, remember, the universe is always conspiring in favor of your awakening. Everything that's happening is in support of you lighting your own fire within. So until we meet again, may your path be well lit and your heart be guided. Shine bright, seekers, until next time.